You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 16th of May, 2025, on Monocle Radio.
US President Donald Trump returns from the Middle East. Has he fixed everything? The contenders for Romania's presidency campaign towards a runoff in the rerun, and Eurovision. This time in 48 hours, it'll all be over. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. It's Friday, so it's our weekly in-house daily, and the Monocle staffers reporting from afar or pontificating from home are Alexa Self, Laura Kramer, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Kamila Wojcinska and Matt Beeman. They'll discuss the day's stuff and we'll have our weekly accounting of what we've learned. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller. US President Donald Trump is on his way back from the Middle East following a brief and eventful visit to Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. While much media attention was preoccupied with Trump's desire to accept the gift of a Boeing 747 from Qatar, deals were done. Sales of arms to Saudi Arabia and aircraft to Qatar, and a partnership to build an AI data complex in Abu Dhabi. Though Trump skipped Israel on this visit, he did suggest that where Palestine was concerned, quote, a lot of good things are going to happen over the next month. Well, I'm joined now with more on this by Monocle's foreign editor, Alexa Self. Lex, overall, was this whole thing any more or less bizarre than we might have expected?
Well, one of Trump's many gifts, if you'd like to call them that, is changing the definition of words or denuding them of their potency. I think bizarre is one of those. Perhaps if we were talking in December 2024, there might have been a way to make this more bizarre. But I think for the bizarre thing for Trump to do would be to, speak in a measured way and perhaps not insult anyone or do that fist pump thing he likes to do. That would be quite bizarre.
He did talk about groceries to one bewildered potentate. That is a word that does seem to have stuck in his head now for quite some time.
Groceries. I missed that.
The clip is worth looking up. Aside from his disquisitions on groceries, did anything leap out at you as especially significant?
Well, obviously the meeting with Ahmed al-Sharaa, Syria's new president, is... If anyone else had met, a former Al-Qaeda fighter who used to have, or any other US politician even, let alone president, who once had a $10 million bounty on his head, it might have had some blowback in the US or it might have been seen as a surprise. I think that's one thing that Trump is skilled at that could potentially be beneficial. The fact that he can move the dial on potentially thorny issues and that it doesn't, people are unfazed by it. So I think, lifting sanctions on Syria is really epochal. And the fact that the US president is doing that. And as I said, if Trump were able to use his powers for good, then I don't know, it would be it would be something beneficial for the world, I feel, and especially for the Middle East. Regardless of what you think of al-Sharaa himself, this is great news for millions of Syrians who are suffering in poverty and wanting to rebuild the country, but are hindered in doing so by sanctions. And anyone who wishes to see the country rebuild and become a functioning state in this volatile region will be buoyed by that. As I said, unfortunately with Trump, when it comes to diplomacy, there's everything else as well as that.
I mean, it is the kind of gesture you can see appeals to him, that kind of like king-like, only I can make this decision, I will shake the hand of this man, I will lift all these sanctions. Do you think as he kind of wanders these vast gilded palaces of the Gulf, he finds himself kind of envying the emirs, maybe thinking, I wish I'd been president somewhere else?
Yeah, and not a lot, I think, different perhaps in the decor between, the Riyadh Imperial Palace and Mar-a-Lago, for example. I'm sure he envies the emirs, and perhaps the thing he envies the most is, the lack of scrutiny and the fact that everyone, that all their citizens are, legally bound to adore them, and that their wealth that need not be plundered. It's handed to them. It's a birthright. I think, and you mentioned the fact that he didn't go to Israel on this trip. I think this was his first big international trip, official trip of his second presidency. And I think, I'm sorry to employ such infantile language on the Monocle Daily, but I think it was a strictly good vibes trip. And I think Israel's not very good vibes place at the moment. And so Trump didn't want to sully all the gold thrones and marble floors with actual, difficult conversations.
Well, he did mention, as I alluded to in the introduction, on his way back, this idea that great things were going to happen for Palestine within the next month. Is this one of those things where Donald Trump is saying what is actually going to happen, or is that of his way of saying, please stop asking me about this, I don't really want to talk about it?
I honestly don't think he gives that much thought to anything that comes out of his mouth, and that we won't know. As I said, the meeting with Ahmed al-Sharaa. I mean, how long was that planned for? I think that Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi government saw this as they slipped it into the itinerary probably a few days before, and have enough, sweetened the trip enough that Trump did it. And I think he's someone who, and whenever I talk to people who've met Donald Trump, they say that, in the moment, he's very kind of warm and charismatic. I think that's part of it. And that's, and again, in dictatorships and autocracies, so much of the statecraft is just smiling for the cameras and standing there and looking big, strong and powerful and shaking hands and it's the theatre of it, because that's all there is. There is no substance. There's no actual debating or a free press or anything like that. So I think that's why he fits in there, because that's how he also sees statecraft. As for the Palestinians, I mean, I don't think getting their hopes up. I'm sure that they, most Palestinians, and especially those in Gaza, have learned that that's not, something that perhaps is borne out with any real evidence, optimism. But as I said, with regard to al-Sharaa, if Trump wanted to, then he probably could force Israel back to the table and stop this new offensive. Whether he will or not, I'm afraid I just don't know.
Just finally and quickly, we do know that one of the things he envies at least one of the emirs is one of his aeroplanes. He has actually been, Trump that is, sulking out loud in public to the effect that it's just not fair that somebody should have a nicer plane than the President of the United States does. Do we actually think that this man, who has so far gotten away with pretty much everything, is going to get away with this?
Probably, yes. I mean, I think at the moment, he's flooding the zone, as he says, so unrelentingly that no one really knows what to do. And it's a brave American lawmaker that stands up to him at the moment, or at least puts their, career or sanity on the line, or financial security on the line to actually go after him. But, if it transpires that there's anything dodgy about this gift, whether it's come in return for a promise, political or financial, or I read this thing that, I'm sorry, I should have written it down, but a Boeing 747 has something like 114 miles of wiring in it. So if any of that wiring is, has a little bit of recording equipment attached to it, then you would hope that would lead to Trump's political downfall, but you wouldn't be sure even in that case.
You would not. Alexis Self, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Daily. You're listening to The Daily with me, Andrew Muller. On Sunday, Romanians will vote in a presidential election runoff. Attentive listeners will be aware that this is the second whack at this process Romanians have taken in recent months. A previous presidential election late last year was annulled by the Constitutional Court over suspicions that a Russian thumb had been planted on the scales. Sunday's two contenders are George Simeon, a hard-right Vladimir Putin enthusiast, and Nikos Dan, current mayor of Bucharest and former international mathematics champion. Well, I'm joined now from Bucharest by Monocle's senior producer and Romania desk chief, Laura Kramer. Laura, before we get into the election, though it may not be apparent to listeners who only know you from your voice, you are in fact visiting your hometown.
I am in Bucharest, where I was born and raised. No bears here, though, I will tell you. I think listeners also know my fondness for the bears of Romania. But it's a very rainy day in Bucharest, and I will tell you, the tension is palpable in the city because nobody really knows what's going to happen on Sunday.
Well, on that thought, what is polling telling us? Is the answer to that question not much?
Pretty much, because it's a very tight race right now. Recent polls have the two separated by really only a few percentage points. And of course, it comes at a geopolitically very critical time, not just due to the war in Ukraine, which obviously borders Romania, but also with the U.S. pulling out from support from the EU, from NATO specifically. It's one of the most consequential votes in Romania's democratic history. Now, this will be the country's fifth president since the fall of communism. And of course, there's a lot at stake because the outcome will determine whether Romania really stays the course on European integration or takes a very sharp nationalist turn, as you mentioned, more isolationist. And being here in Bucharest and seeing everything that's happening, every time I come here, I see just more things. Businesses popping up, the airport is expanding, there's construction anywhere. It seems like Romania is on this great path to really become one of the capitals. There's a lot more tourism coming. People are very excited about the future of the country, and especially here in Bucharest. And it seems like there is a worry that what's going to happen on Sunday is potentially going to cap that momentum.
Well, let's talk about the reason that momentum could be capped, because I think it will be a source of bewilderment to quite a lot of non-Romanian listeners that an obviously pro-Russian candidate could be a factor at all, never mind probably the current favourite to win. Romania is obviously a frontline state. It does have living memory of being dominated by a communist and authoritarian government, and it shares long land borders with Ukraine. So the question thus arises, who is voting for him?
Well, it's a very good question. I think George Simeon and his party and other far-right parties have really tapped into this fear that people have about their economic well-being, about where the country is going, of course, cost of living crisis everywhere. And so it's not very hard for them to tap into that and say, hey, you know what, this might be the reason that this is happening, whether it's help for Ukrainians or whether it's the EU not giving us enough support. He says, actually, George Simeon says that he believes in the European project. He doesn't want to pull out of the EU, but the EU just tends to look at all the countries rather than looking at it as a nest with different eggs. They just have the same policies, and it doesn't work that way because these are very different countries. So he wants to change that.
And let's look at his rival, the mayor of Bucharest. What is different about what he's offering?
Well, so he's an independent centrist, and of course, he's kind of counting on the capital to come home. It's home to a quarter of Romania's 19 million citizens. So he's, of course, banking on a strong turnout from Romania's cities, the youth, the diaspora. And the diaspora is really actually a very interesting point of this, because I think it's really something that sets Romania apart from many other countries who are having these votes, because voting has actually started for Romanians in the diaspora today, while the rest of the country heads to the polls on Sunday. And it's a very significant size of the voting public because there are about 6 million Romanians in the diaspora. Fun fact for you, Andrew, a Romanian who was the first person to vote today was actually in New Zealand. He was there for 8 years and he voted in Auckland at a polling station there. So there are around 965 polling stations around the world concentrated in countries with the largest Romanian communities, the top 5 so far: Italy, Spain, the UK, Germany, France, followed, of course, by Moldova and the US. And the numbers that I've been seeing is that 70% more Romanians have been turning up to vote in the diaspora compared to the first round. In Moldova, 3 times as many voters showed up. And with such a surge, the diaspora could very well tip the balance in one of the most consequential elections in Romania's recent history.
And we will doubtless have more from you next week once we know the result. Laura Kramer in Bucharest, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio with me, Andrew Muller. The final of this year's Eurovision Song Contest takes place tomorrow night in Basel, and apparently, indeed inexplicably, people are still planning to watch it, despite the ejection from proceedings of Australia's obviously bound for glory entry at the semi-final stage, an act of shabby and outrageous chicanery perpetrated by jealous Europeans. However, among the participants in what is now an absurd charade is Monocle's senior correspondent and Eurovision desk chief Fernando Augusto Pacheco, who joins me now from Basel. Fernando, I have a question in 2 parts. When Australia were knocked out on Thursday night, why was there not a riot, and why were you not leading it on my behalf?
You know what? I can sympathize with your vision, Andrew, because Milkshake Man was a great song. But I can tell you already what was the problem. It was a little bit too much on your face, or on your crotch, if I may say. You know, there was no kind of ambiguity to that, and I think perhaps that's why it didn't go through. But I feel a little bit sad, so I hear you, Andrew. Yeah,
Eurovision, of course, being arena well known for encouraging the flourishing of subtle songcraft. How are things going generally in Basel, Fernando? Are they being good hosts?
They are being great hosts. I think the weather is helping. It's lovely. It's sunny. It's about 20 degrees. And I think it's been a while since Switzerland have done that. So every time this happens to a country, I think they're quite proud of their achieving. The vibe in, everybody was wearing t-shirts, everybody was drinking. The Eurovision village in Basel actually is quite, outstanding. So far, so good. And I'm having the best of both worlds, because I'm talking to you now here in our Zurich headquarters in Duferstrasse. And even here in Zurich, you can feel the Eurovision spirit. I was at a bar, watching the second semifinals, so I could see there were a lot of people in there. So yeah, so far, so good here in Switzerland.
Fernando, I am sitting here scrutinising the odds. The bookmakers have Sweden installed as favourites at about even money. The Swedish entry is dreadful. It involves a great deal of accordion, a certain amount of singing in Swedish, which is usually a no-no. There is a conventional wisdom that you have to sing in English to win this thing. Is this a lock, or could somebody upset them?
By the way, not anymore. Songs in their original language are becoming more and more popular. And I think the Swedish case, is a main reason of that. Because Sweden always sounds like acts singing in English. But Bara Bara Vasti, even I can sing that, and I don't speak very well Swedish. But yes, there is a sense that maybe, the song is the favorite. But you know what? I don't think it's a done deal. I think Austria, France, Netherlands, or even Finland could take that. Because last year, the odds were wrong. Croatia was supposed to be the main winner. They didn't win. So, we shouldn't only trust the odds. But having said that, it is a fun track. It is a celebration of saunas. And, everybody's talking about saunas these days. Here in Monaco, we've been talking for a few years, so we're top of our game when it comes to saunas.
Fernando, you have been to Basel to see the stage. What can we expect?
I think it's one of the best stages from all my Eurovision so far. It's my 10th, so I'm celebrating a decade of covering Eurovision for Monaco. It's beautiful. It's quite enormous, I have to say. There is a certain, it looks like a frame. I don't know how to explain that to the public, but I think if you've seen how it looks, it is big. The graphics are amazing. I had the pleasure to speak to Florian Wieder, who is the stage designer. That's also, I think, his 8th Eurovision. And he said he's very happy. I think that's his favorite stage so far as well. Gives a lot of space for the audience to connect as well with the artists. And of course, I'm very excited for tomorrow. It looks very beautiful. So well done, Switzerland, in this one.
Fernando, we will finish this interview shortly by asking you for your actual tip. But before we do that, I want to ask you about a tip at the other end of the leaderboard, because the bookmakers here in the United Kingdom, at least, also believe that yet again the UK is on course to come last. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree. I don't think the UK would do super well. It's not necessarily my favorite entry. I think they have beautiful voices, but there's some problems with the staging. Mildly tacky, if I may say, but I don't think it's going to be the last. According to the real bookies, I'm having a look here, it's Armenia. I mean, the guy looks like a kind of a sexy mechanic, but the song is a bit tired. It's not for me, but who knows? I mean, he does have the good looks. It could help him in the final, but at the moment, he's the one who's supposed to be on bottom. And Portugal, but again, Portugal, they always send this kind of indie rock vibes. There's a strong market for that. I actually think Portugal will end up doing well and end up in the top 10.
Well, finally then, Fernando, we can't put this off any longer. Who is your actual tip? Who is going to win this thing?
Well, it's going to be Finland with Erika Wickman. I think it's a piece of art, the song. I think she's amazing. She is empowered. She's talking about sex, and the song also relates to 90s rave culture with some touches of Underworld's Born Sleepy. I think she's excellent, and I do love Erika. It's divisive, though. Not everyone would agree with me. So I think, but my tip would be Erika Wickman. And by the way, Andrew, I should also mention that we have some sort of breaking news. I might be spreading rumors here, okay?
Well, but Fernando, which is it? Is it breaking news or rumors? I mean, I don't care, but I would prefer to know which one.
That's a very good point. But if even the BBC have reported, that's kind of news. But apparently, Celine Dion's private jet have landed in Basel, and apparently she will be performing in the big final. And I do have to add the apparently every time, but because of course she gave us a message on Tuesday saying, I'm sorry that I can't be there, and she said some beautiful things about the event. But listen, if her private jet is here, she must be here, right?
I don't know. Maybe she sent it there for a service. I don't know how these things work.
We'll find out on Saturday, but I have a good inkling that she will be here.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's Eurovision Desk Chief, thank you for joining us. For more Eurovision coverage, do tune in to Monocle's new shows across the weekend. Fernando will have the latest on Celine Dion and other matters arising. You are now listening to the Monocle Daily. You're listening to the Monocle Daily with me, Andrew Muller. Now, the 10th edition of Photo London is presently underway at Somerset House, and among those who have already been are Matthew Beeman, Monocle's photography director, and Kamila Wojcinska, Monocle's deputy photography editor. Hello to you both. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
You've been to Photo London. Obviously, that's why you're here. What did you see there? And we'll be looking, Matthew, for a bit more detail than loads of photos.
Lots of photos. But the 10th year, they've installed a new director of the fair this year, Sophie Parker, who I think has had quite a good effect on the curation of the fair. So I think in the past they've been accused of being overly commercialized in the types of photography they show. So there has been some lots of pictures of black and white pictures of wildlife, zebras striding across plains and things like that. Whereas she has reorganized the space a bit, so some of the more contemporary art photography galleries have been given much more prominence. So when you first enter the fair, you're met with Weber Gallery, which is a really great contemporary art photography gallery. And so I think these small changes in the types of photography that you're shown as you come in has made a good difference.
Camilla, Matthew's reference there to pictures of zebras does remind us that when they say Photo London, it's not just photos of London, unless someone's left a gate open at Regent's Park Zoo. So if it's not photos about London, is there a general organising principle of this year's event?
I think what's beautiful is the variety of work. And as much as it's not about pictures of London, there is a section called London Lives, which has a variety of photographers from London or making work in London for a very long time over the years. There is Ewan Spencer, Nigel Shafran, Hannah Starkey, all amazing work that it's kind of like a journey for me from my uni years to right now, and like all the photographers that I learned about and like, you know, studied their photography, and the like pleasure to see them in big prints on walls. It's incredible.
Regular readers of Monocle magazine, and who wouldn't be, Matthew, will be aware that it does still place what might be thought of as an old-fashioned value on photography. It's something we're still very, very keen on. Is there any sense at an event like Photo London, if not necessarily in the displays, but in the conversation of fear of what the next wave of technology might do for or to photography?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it's interesting, the effect of AI on photography. There's a lot of talk about that in photography, and actually seeing a lot of the commercial photography that's being produced, especially for luxury brands at the moment, is very obviously analog. And I think that there's been a real concerted move, a shift back to analog photography just to show that it hasn't been generated by a computer, and it's not this perfect image in a way, that just to leave some of the imperfections of shooting on film, the grain, and that's like a concerted effort by a lot of brands, you know, today. So it's an interesting time. It's almost the ability to make that perfect image means that other photographers want to show that they have taken the picture and there's a human side to it. So it's an interesting time.
Well, yeah, let's talk a bit on the basis of that about the things taken by human photographers that you especially enjoyed at this year's Photo London. Camilla, other than the ones you mentioned earlier, the accidental chronicle of your university years, what else leapt off the walls at you?
It's always great to see new agencies and new galleries that are popping up. Palm Studios being one of them. Polish-Australian duo Lola and Pani, representing work from contemporary photographers who work both editorially and make their own, you know, personal bodies of work, like Molly Matlin, Caroline Tompkins, presenting their own work through Palm Studios as well. And Sercia Gallery, run by Christine, she also is looking for young talent, new photography. It's a lot of black and white work. Pia Gilmuth is in it during this fair. Amak Mahmoudian, incredible photographer. Yeah.
You mentioned there, Matthew, that some photographers who have appeared in Monocle are also appearing at Photo London. To what extent is this, for someone in your position, a bit of a recruiting expedition? Are you walking around with a notepad writing down names?
Yeah, maybe not so much in the main fair, but so today there are two other satellite exhibitions that are happening at the same time. So there's Offprint, which takes place in the Turbine Hall of Tate Modern. It's a big independent publishing fair, mainly of photo books, but zines and graphic design books. And there's a lot. That's quite a good hunting ground for new talent. There's like the RCA publishing arm. They have lots of students' work that they publish, and that's really good. And there's also another big exhibition which kicks off today in Peckham called Peckham 24 and runs for the weekend. And that's curated by the head of photography at FT Weekend magazine and amongst other people. And that's an exhibition for breakthrough photographers. So there's lots of younger people who haven't quite made it into the commercial galleries of Photo London. But for us, as commissioning editors, it's good ground to find new people. When browsing the fair, there were actually quite a few like competitions and highlights of new artists. Some of them still at university, some of them names that I haven't seen before through and their work was exhibited through like Lens Culture and even Photo London itself does like a little highlight. I think they're doing something similar to Paris Photo's Carte Blanche, which is very exciting. That's always the fun thing to see.
So just finally, Matthew, would you recommend this as a day out even for people who may not be professionally preoccupied with photography?
Absolutely. I think there's such a, especially this year, I think there's such a broad range of photography. There's everything from music photography to wildlife to landscape, and then the more contemporary art photography. I think I can't remember how many galleries are showing there, but it's at least 100. I don't. So there's all sorts. I think a good day tomorrow, a sunny day at Somerset House would be nice.
Matthew Beeman and Kamila Wojcinska, thank you both for joining us. You're listening to The Daily. You're listening to The Daily with me, Andrew Muller, and finally on today's show, our weekly totting up of the increase in the general wisdom bequeathed by the last 7 days. We learned this week, and once again, of the reliable facility of the Eurovision Song Contest for conjuring diplomatic incidents about which not one sane person cares in the slightest. Or do they?
Oh, phew.
Thank God for that.
I, for one, very much care about this kind of
now,
thing, and I'm definitely not mental.
Well, fair enough. We learned that this year's iteration of the Pan-Continental Warbling Tournament, which will be all over for another glorious year as of Sunday,
Yay!
had occasioned hostilities between Italy and Estonia. We learned that the cause of this diplomatic spat, possibly indeed even a stramash gusting full-blown brouhaha, was this.
Ciao Bella, I'm Tommaso, addicted to tobacco. Me like me coffee, very importante.
That being Estonia's 2025 submission, Espresso Macchiato by Tommy Cash. No relation, so far as we have been able to discern, to Johnny, June Carter or Roseanne. We learned upon reluctant scrutiny of the lyrics that Italy, the aggrieved party in this instance, aside from, music lovers or people with serviceable ears generally, may actually have a case, as the lyrics can be fairly said to have applied the Italian stereotypes with a somewhat heavy hand on the trowel.
I work around the clock, that's why I'm sweating like a mafioso. Life is like spaghetti, it's hard until you make it.
We learned that among the Italian politicians who had perceived mileage in pretending to be enraged by this drivel was Gianmarco Centinaio, Vice President of the Senate, who thundered thus, as will now be intoned with due menace by Monocle's Inane Vendettas desk chief, Chiara Ramella.
Whoever insults Italy must stay out of Eurovision.
We learned, however, that as of the first semi-final on Tuesday, this was a minority opinion, as Estonia's jabbering nonsense won through to Saturday's final, where bookmakers confidently expect them not to win. Although we learned upon scrutiny of the odds that bookmakers do reckon that this, from Sweden, might win, and to be honest, it's not notably worse. Been a while since we've had a Eurovision winner with an accordion, and on which subject? What should you throw to a drowning accordionist? Their accordion. Perusing the semi-final results further, however, we learned of the folly of the fate-tempting song title, in this instance deployed by Slovenia, specifically
How much time do we have left together?
none, it turned out. Sticking, however, with the subject of continental oddballs beclowning themselves while attempting to rouse the pride of their it would appear to be Accordion Week, which, who knows, might yet become a national holiday in Germany if certain excitable yahoos get their way. Regular listeners to these weekly news reviews may recall that late 2022 or so, we met tweed-jacketed minor aristocrat Heinrich XIII and several co-conspirators who were rolled up by German plod on charges of plotting to re-establish the German Empire as it was from 1871 to 1918. And sure, why not? It went pretty well for at least 43 of those 47 years. We learned, however, of another bunch of hapless bozos seized with similar ambitions, which, we learned, unaccountably given the intellectual firepower animating the scheme, had also been thwarted. Aww. We learned that the ringleaders of Clue in the Name Kingdom of Germany, which, like pretty much everything else, sounds more ominous in the original German, i.e. Königreich Deutschland, had gotten their outfit banned and their collars felt. Among the arrestees, their putative monarch, Peter Fitzek, or Peter I, to his acolytes, whose as yet incomplete ascent to the German throne has included stints as a New Age bookseller and karate instructor, and given the luck he is having as a royalty restorationist, probably wise he has options to fall back on. Persisting with the motif of adventures in Middle European law enforcement, cue the Alphorns. We learned quite a lot about both the top flight speed and the lack of respect for traffic laws of the mallard. Yes, we learned this from police in the central Swiss settlement of Könitz, who, 1, may not be overstretched, and 2, released images of said wild duck caught by traffic cameras in the small hours, proceeding at a clip reckoned at not less than 52 kilometers per hour in what is, as the road signage makes abundantly clear, a 30 kilometer per hour zone. It gets worse. Könitz's finest believe, or at least have been willing to speculate in order to attract attention on social media, that the creature is a repeat offender, a similar-looking bird having been photographed in exactly the same spot, doing roughly the same speed in 2018. Verily, those night shifts at the Könitz cop shop in the intervening 7 years must have absolutely whooshed by. At the very real risk of appearing humorless, however, it is little wonder in the footage that no people are visible on the streets, which, were it not for fear of the duck, would surely be like the streets of every other Swiss town after dark, i.e. a riot of colour, music, dance and breezy good vibes to rival Rio in Carnival Week. For what we mostly learn is that the clearly terrified burghers of Könitz are being sorely let down by law enforcement, in that the duck remains clearly at large, police having failed after all this time to...
Oh no.
Quack the case.
Boo.
And that, probably mercifully, is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Alexa Self, Laura Kramer, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Camila Wojcinska and Matthew Beeman. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance from Jack Dewars. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have an excellent Eurovision weekend.